In this video, I'm going to be looking at the low light, high ISO performance of Canon's new R6. And I'm going to be comparing it to one of my favourite cameras of all time, the Panasonic GH5S. I took both cameras out and waited for the sun to go down so I could start ramping up the ISOs and compare them. So here's a quick rundown of how I had the cameras set up. Firstly, I set them both to their respective natural profiles, with the contrast and noise reduction set to minimum on both. Being a low light test, I chose not to use log on either camera. On the Canon, I was using the Sigma 24mm f1.4 art lens set to f8. On the Panasonic, I was using the Panasonic Leica 12mm f1.4, again set to f8. And finally, I was recording in 4K at 25 frames per second with the shutter at 1/50th on both. I started the test at ISO 200 because that's the base value on the GH5S. And first off, I'd say both of them look pretty clean. At ISO 400, I'm seeing a tiny bit of grain on the GH5S footage, while the R6 looks really smooth, but that's nitpicking. Both look really good to me. At ISO 800, this is probably about what the scene looked like in real life to my eye, so it was pretty dark. The R6 doesn't look quite as pristine as it did, but it's still really nice. The GH5S looks about the same to me. At ISO 1600, the orange glow on the R6 looks a bit smoother, but the GH5S is still doing amazingly well for a camera with a micro four thirds sensor. At 3200, if you look for it, you can start to see a slight amount of noise around the streetlights on the GH5S, but the image as a whole still looks nice. At 6400, we're starting to get serious. On some other cameras, if there's little to no movement in the scene, this is the point at which I'd start thinking about maybe slowing the shutter to 1/25th. But no need here, both cameras still holding up really well. At ISO 12800, we begin to see what's in the foreground, and there's noise in the grass on the GH5S, but the R6 still looks remarkably clean. But look at the sky, it's starting to lose its colour. At ISO 25600, the R6 is really blowing out the sky. I'm sure if I was using C-Log it would be better, but then you'd likely see more noise. From a noise perspective, I'm astounded the R6 is still usable, but I wouldn't use the GH5S footage here. The grass is really noisy. But look at the GH5S holding onto those details in the sky. Is it possible the GH5S has better dynamic range than the R6? So just for fun, let's try 51,200. And yep, the GH5S is a noisy mess. The R6 is pretty noisy too, but its noise pattern is less offensive, and maybe I'd consider using this in an emergency. So to sum up, the R6 is indeed a bit of a low light beast, and it definitely beat the GH5S by at least one stop, and it generally looks smoother throughout its ISO range. So I'd say it's a big step up in performance from any previous Canon camera I've used, including the C200. But that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.